Hey Gid, me again. I haven't read these yet, so it'll be a surprise for me also. Analyse how media codes and conventions have combined to create an effect on or engage an audience in one or more of the media narratives you've studied this year. Answers should include at least 2 codes and 2 conventions. You haven't written the marks for this one, but I suspect it's a big one. That's probably a 10-mark question, but it is a nice one. You really only have to write, you don't necessarily have to bring in codes and conventions. Yes, you do. You don't necessarily have to bring in ideology, is what I meant to say. I mean, you could, but yeah. Was it to engage? Yeah, okay. So I'll shut up and read it. The technical code of sound and the symbolic code of acting with the genre convention of narrative tropes and the story convention of point of view to create meaning in Bong Joon-ho's technical film Okja. Yeah, it's a weird sentence. I'd just say creates maybe. I think that's, yeah. So I think it's the 2 that messes that sentence up because it makes it sound like there's more to come. So the technical code of sound and the symbolic code of acting combined with the genre convention of narrative tropes and the story convention of point of view creates meaning in Bong Joon-ho's, remember we're saying narrative fictional film, not just fictional film, Okja, and then you're fine. So it's just the 2 that messes it up. It just sounded a bit clunky. That's fine. That's not going to cost you marks. It's just not a good first impression. The train station chase scene is one example of where these codes and conventions work together to create meaning. The frightening nature of the scene is undercut by the use of the non-diegetic orchestral score. The song, any song, plays whilst Okja destroys the shopping centre, disrupting the peace and making onlookers scream in terror. The cognitive dissonance, lovely, created by playing this music subverts the narrative trope of having music which I'm not sure what that word is. It's probably been cut off a bit. I suspect that's going to say accurately. Subverts the narrative trope of having music which accurately reflects the mood of the scene. This in turn creates a comic effect in the audience as the upbeat and lightheartedness of the track conflicts with the images on screen. Through this, the director Ho accentuates his message that the situation is absurd and that this animosity and chaos could be avoided if we, the audience, weren't so reliant on mass meat production. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I would probably just give it more depth analytically, and I'd just put in the extra sentence that we've said before about by making light of what is, with differing music or more serious orchestral music would create a more dramatic and fearful scene. Making light of situations like this throughout the film, it makes the slaughterhouse scene during the 3rd act or during the resolution of the film far more impactful when there is an absence of music and just the sound of gunshots, something like that. Just to really drive home some really strong analysis. The specific choice of any song too has a gentle and nostalgic tone which counteracts the violence in the scene, allowing the audience to disconnect from the emotion of the scene and view the necessity of the violence objectively and what could have been done to avoid it. Yeah, I see what you're saying. It makes it sound like you're saying the violence is necessary with the wording of that. I'd probably just tweak the word necessity there. Acting and point of view also utilised in this scene to evoke a similar effect. Actor Paul Dano in his portrayal of the character Jay uses his facial expression to indicate the care he has for Okja. His furrowed brow and wide-open eyes are so overdramatically delivered that it almost becomes comedic. This is similarly indicated by the train station guards who comically stumble and trip over marbles thrown out of the truck by the ALF. Just remember, I don't feel that you've said it yet, but your markers won't know what that means. So the first time you say it in each response, just write the Animal Liberation Front and then just put ALF in brackets after it and then you're good to go. The use of an unrestricted point of view in mise-en-scène further adds to... Oh, in this scene, I was like, what? The use of unrestricted point of view in this scene further adds to Ho's message that audiences should reconsider their consumption of meat as the score jumps to different characters highlighting... The scene, rather, jumps to different characters highlighting that everyone is somewhat emotionally affected by the distress of an animal, whether it be the screaming crowd who are literally running away in fear from mass production, to the close-ups of the curious characters' look of shock and terror. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. I mean, I wouldn't mind a little bit more detail, but it's a hell of a lot to be asked to write in timed conditions. To have to write about 2 codes and 2 conventions and analyse all of those, it's a really big ask. There's a lot to write about, and I suspect this is a 10-mark question. But even then, that's a fair bit. So I would say you've ticked all the boxes. You've got good terminology. You've got some good analysis, a few extra sentences here and there of the deeper stuff, like I was saying, I would say. And at the end, that's probably a little bit, another sentence or two. Because with unrestricted point of view, for example, you don't actually say how it's there or what it actually is. You just say that it's there. So just little things like that, an extra sentence or two. This would certainly be no less than an 8 out of 10, depending on your marker. The analysis is pretty good. You'd probably even jag a 9 on a good day. But those extra couple of sentences scattered throughout that elaborate further on what you've got, like I said, you haven't really stated how it's an unrestricted point of view and the effect specifically that choice has. I mean, you do say it, what the effect is, but we don't see how that connection is made when you don't actually say what the unrestricted point of view is. Yeah, the acting analysis is good. And the explanation of it, yeah, the song and yeah, cognitive dissonance is a good word, a couple of words. Yeah, that extra thing about I said about to make the slaughterhouse scene later in the film even more impactful by making light of what could have been more serious scenes earlier in the film would be a good thing to chuck in somewhere. I mean, and this is pretty solid. You pull this out in time conditions. Yeah, like I said, a few extra sentences, probably a little short. If you can bust out a few extra sentences with a bit more detail, that might get you up around the 9, really confidently 9, 10. But this is, I mean, as it is, it's pretty good. It's just a matter of how your marker's feeling on the day. But you'd get no less than an 8 out of 10, certainly. I feel you'd be closer to a 9, and those extra couple of sentences would get you the 10. All right. How may an audience construct meaning in a media narrative? 2 marks. An audience may, excuse me, an audience may receive a narrative differently based on its ideology as well as their social and cultural context. If the narrative has a particularly explicit or overt ideology, that is, an ideology which is not widely agreed upon to be the correct interpretation, maybe rather than correct, say preferred. Preferred reading is what we talk about when we're talking about different audiences' interpretations. So remember when we're talking about, I think maybe it was you I was talking about the other day, that the terminology out of the encoding decoding theory by Stuart Hall, we talk about preferred readings, which is the reading the media creator intends to be taken from it, and then there's the negotiated reading, which is what the audience takes upon it based on their own backgrounds. So that is better terminology rather than saying correct, because there's no real right and wrong, it's just a matter of how people see things. So that is, an ideology was not widely agreed upon to be the negotiated reading of a subject or of a media product or issue. It can cause the audience members to dismiss a narrative or view it contemptuously. Conversely, an implicit narrative may be dismissed by audience members for being too subtle and not taking a strong enough stance on an issue. Yes, even with generic questions, I know there's only 2 marks, you've written a stack for a 2-mark question, I would still have an example in there to clarify. Now in this case it might only be a line or 2, a sentence, but for a generic question I would still have an example in there to I guess, elaborate on and explain further what you've already said. You don't want to just have a generic one. So I would have a sentence or two out of, colossal or Oakja to clarify what you mean. So you can, with Oakja, obviously it's very easy. You can then just go. An example of this was with the film Bong Joon-ho's narrative fictional film Oakja, where there was a strong veganistic ideology. Those with veganistic slantings, or that's probably not a great way of saying that, or believe in vegan ideals and the reduction of meat consumption, strongly agreed with the messages of the film, whereas there were others who strongly disagreed with it and referred to the film as being just another example of the vegan virus being spread throughout society. Something like that with that. And also, how may an audience construct meaning in a media narrative? They can also, I would have maybe a reference to codes and conventions, because that's how the audience really is constructed. Even though you're presenting an ideology, how is that ideology presented? Through the construction of it, through codes and conventions. So it wouldn't hurt to chuck that in there as well. You'd probably, realistically, you'd probably jag a 2 anyway. You certainly wouldn't get 0. And then it becomes a matter, so it becomes a matter of 1 or 2. It becomes a matter of what the marking criteria say. And the example would guarantee that, because would guarantee the 2, because I know in the marking criteria for the atom practice exam, for example, it said a high scoring response will use an example. Otherwise, particularly for a 3-marker, you'll only get sort of 2 out of 3. So even if it's only a sentence or 2, bang in an example, even if it's a generic question. 4 marks, how may the reception and or audience engagement have changed over time in one media narrative? Alrighty. The reception of Nacho Vigalondo Colossal has changed. The reception of Nacho Vigalondo's narrative fictional film Colossal, Gideon Aroni, has changed over time due to the controversial social, okay, I thought it said facial, I was like, what are we talking about here? Has changed over time due to the controversial social issues which have broken since its release. Colossal was released in April of 2017, 6 months before the Weinstein allegations were first made public. Chuck in Harvey Weinstein for the first time, just in case you've got a really dumb marker that doesn't know what that means. These included famous Hollywood producer, okay, you've elaborated there, fair enough, ignore what I said. These included famous Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein sexually harassing and exploiting actresses who were in his movies. This led to an explosion of people coming forward claiming similar things with the hashtag #MeToo. I'd maybe say with the hashtag #MeToo movement increasing in popularity as a result, something like that. This display of sexual violence and male exploitation. This display of sexual violence and male exploitation of their role as a powerful figure is clearly depicted in Colossal. In the film, Oscar is seen to mentally and physically abuse Gloria by using the fact he turns into a monster as a way to keep her from leaving the small town. Good context there, yep, so your marker knows what's going on. Audience members in the past may have received this, don't say may, say it as fact. Okay, so in the example that I've sent out, I've used different reviews. So how earlier reviews, when it first came out before the Weinstein stuff, described it as like goofy and a fun romp and all that sort of stuff. And then after the Weinstein stuff happened, reviews referred to it as a dark exploration of social tyranny and stuff like that. So those quotes strengthen what you're saying rather than, otherwise it just sounds like you're making stuff up. Audience members in the past did receive, so to say, audience members in the past received this message to be, well, I'd say lighter. Contrived or unrealistic means you're making a judgment on how they felt about it. And you don't want to put yourself in the position of saying how other people felt. Yeah, so I would replace that paragraph with the stuff that I was just saying. Modern day audiences will likely receive the film with shock and horror with the Weinstein context in mind as it is. Yeah, so those 2 paragraphs I would get rid of and replace with the stuff that I was talking about. And when I send this, just in case I haven't sent it to you, I'll send the sample answer through that I'm talking about that has those reviews in it. because that will make this stronger. That will, because at the moment you're just talking hypothetically, and that's not strong enough. Okay, for a 4 marker, you probably, the first 2 paragraphs are fine. Third paragraph's good. Yeah, then your next 2 paragraphs need to be bigger. Probably these, particularly with your thumb gaps between the words. You'd probably need a little bit more detail of those with that stuff about the movie reviews. But I'll put it in the email. So probably it's a 2 currently, this one. Probably not enough detail. Maybe a 3. There's good stuff in there. You might get a 3. 2's probably a bit harsh. But to get a solid, definitely 3 and try to get a 4, you need to put in the movie review stuff. It's too vague at the moment. Outline one way the relationship between the media and audiences is regulated. Outline one way. Okay. 4 marks. This is a pretty straightforward one. This is sort of essentially a rote-learned one that you should build. The media is often regulated in the form of classification by a regulatory body. One such body is the Australian Classification Board, the ACB, which imposes ratings on film, TV and video. No, stop saying TV. The ACB does not classify TV. TV is not classified by a government body. It is largely self-regulatory with Free TV Australia. The ACB only imposes ratings that have to be followed legally on film, video games and publications such as magazines. Okay? Don't say TV. Don't say TV. Okay? So, but that's a really good paragraph apart from that. This protects vulnerable audiences such as children from viewing potentially harmful or explicit content which may harm their developing brains. One example of the ACB regulating the media for vulnerable audiences is the 2012 film Children's Island. The ACB removed a 2-minute scene. Did they do it, or did they make the producers do it? It would be unusual for the ACB to take out, or to edit a film. So the ACB demanded that a 2-minute section of the film be removed in order to be released and not branded with a refused classification rating in Australia, full stop. The scene in question, that's how you put that in, the scene in question depicted underage sexually explicit content as well as initially... Okay, that's just a clunky paragraph, but I know what you're saying, so just say that better. And say what the content is. You know, it showed naked underage actors, children. And also highlight the fact that, what's it say? Outline is okay. In a bigger one when it's asking you to maybe analyse, or if you're analysing, you're presenting positives and negatives. Outline here, you probably don't need to, but if you're analysing, you're presenting positive and negative. So talk about the fact that it was 30-odd years old, and then the federal police went to the ACB and asked them to basically ban the film, which is highly unusual, etc. Critics of regulation may describe this process as censorship, as by the film releasing with the 2-minute scene missing, it is depriving audience members of viewing the film in its entirety. Yes, but like I said, it's not an analytical question. It's asking you to outline one way the relationship between the media and audiences is regulated in Australia. So it should just be detail with a little bit more. Have your example by all means. You should have an example, but outline in more detail the way that it's, and the reasons and how, the rules, etc. that go with it. Okay, so for a 4 marker, you're probably, it's vague. You'd probably get a 3. You'd probably get a 3 out of 4. But it just needs a little bit more detail and to be better written in order to get the 4. Okay.